It is my pleasure to welcome to the podcast the author of The Boy Crisis, Why Our Boys Are Struggling and What We Can Do About It, Dr. Warren Farrell. Warren, thank you so much.
I am just looking so forward to talking with you.
So you came to this work by helping women, I want to say. You were working with the National Organization of Women. You were elected to the board of directors, their New York chapter, several times. You then went to work in the Obama administration on gender issues. Is that all correct?
The first part, yes, and the Obama administration reached out when they formed the Council for Women and Girls and asked me to be on their advisory board, but they ended up never creating that advisory board. And when they asked me that, I said, we also need a White House Council on Boys and Men. And they said, oh, well, submit a proposal. So I submitted a very extensive proposal, getting people from all over experts from all over the world to contribute to it. And they never let it off the ground. At the last, we had the Boy Scouts endorsing it and ready to present it to President Obama, standing outside of his office. 2 minutes before the meeting, Valerie Jarrett came up and said, no, we have, let's take this off the agenda, and didn't allow us to present it, and never did allow us to get anywhere.
That is very disheartening. So let's rewind a bit further back. How did you come to this set of issues, and what did you get your PhD in?
I got my PhD in political science, but while I was doing my dissertation, I was teaching at Rutgers University, and I was so excited about the women's movement. The students told me, Warren, you've got to do your dissertation in something related to women's issues. And so I changed my dissertation topic. And then that led to be focused on women's issues. And that led ultimately, long story short, to my getting elected to the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City, and starting some 300 men's groups around the country and some 250 women's groups. Every speech I would go to, I'd pass out yellow pads, have people sign up for women's or men's groups. And it was those men's groups that were, the main focus of a men's group is you must have everything be confidential. And once men trusted the confidentiality, all sorts of stories poured out of them that made me also have empathy for men. So when I started integrating the male perspective and the female perspective in my for my audiences, I began to notice the enthusiasm was less than it was when I was just when I was only talking about the women's perspective.
It's quite a progression you've had, and you document some of the men's stories that opened up your sense of empathy in the book. So you and I met when you interviewed various presidential candidates in Iowa right after your book came out in 2018. Is that right?
Yes. The Boy Crisis had just come out. And as I was mentioning to you beforehand, you were, of the 8 presidential candidates I interviewed, you were the only one who really knew it without my having to introduce the material. The others were, oh, interesting, or barely paid attention. And you just went right on, and as if you had written the book with me. It was really very impressive.
Well, I was aware of the problem among boys and men from the research I did in my book, The War on Normal People, that came out in 2018. Mm-hmm. So you and I think were barking up the same tree, doing research in 2017. And the numbers around boys and men I found staggeringly difficult and challenging and depressing. And I believe that they were being compounded by the economic transformation of the fourth industrial revolution. The easiest example I would draw was that, look, 2/3 to 3/4 of manufacturing workers are or were men. We eliminated 5 million manufacturing jobs. So that's disproportionately going to affect men, primarily in Midwestern and Southern states. If you have an extra 1, 2, 3 million unemployed men, then you're going to see some serious problems arise. And in lockstep with that has been a decline in marriage rates among people without college degrees nationwide. It's gone from 70% in the 80s or 70s to 45% today. And that's a number that really hurt me, because getting married seems like something that a lot of people, in my mind at least, when I was growing up, you kind of projected for yourself. Like you thought, hey, I'm gonna, mature, get a job, get married. So the fact that that's less than a 50-50 proposition for the majority of Americans really hurt my heart.
Absolutely. Well, you and I are very oriented towards solutions. So each of those fortunately has solutions. So this, in Japan, about 25% of the student population goes to vocational school. The people who graduate from vocational school, which is almost all the ones that enter the vocational school track, 99.6% of them get employed. Today, we have boys feeling we are not training boys for AI, for all the new evolution of vocations that are coming up. And so, as you said, when the manufacturing jobs disappear, when a guy who's not academically inclined can't repair a car anymore because the cars are so different, but he has to learn different types of repairing techniques. All of these are doable, as Japan is proving, and all of these leave boys with a sense of purpose when they graduate, and of course girls too, but it's disproportionately boys that are dropping out of high school. And a boy that drops out of high school is more than 20% likely to be unemployed. Therefore, we have boys today 66% more likely to be living in their parents' basement or living with their parents after college or after high school than we do their female counterparts. And I don't know any of my female friends or my daughters that are interested in searching the basements of boyfriends to see whether, they don't search unemployment lines, and they don't search boys living at home for their future husbands. And as you said in your last podcast with Zach, when you had graduated from law school and decided not to pursue that, and your first two jobs were not super successful, you didn't have that confidence inside of yourself, nor were women as interested in you, and you sort of sensed that. And it wasn't until you really succeeded and then you met Evelyn that you started to sort of feel a different type of energy that led to your marriage. And so the focus on vocational education, on boys achieving, these are things that allow women to look for these type of men. And when they don't find those type of men, they decide eventually to have children without being married. And so, as you know, 50% of women under 30 who have children are not married, and about 42% of women overall are not married. And marriage is not as big an issue until you look at the fact that the people, even who are living together, women and men who are living together that aren't married, those relationships only last an average of 2.5 to 3 years, which then means the boy feels abandoned, doesn't have a role model. The girl doesn't have a role model, and girls and boys who don't have a father, significant father involvement, do worse on more than 70 different metrics of success and happiness as they're growing up, and boys more so, more intensely so than girls.
Yeah, that's one of the defining elements of the boy crisis that you outline in your book. And your book is chock full of data and statistics. As someone who likes that stuff, I found it very, very compelling. So if let's very quickly try and define the boy crisis for people who might be listening in. So I wrote a recent op-ed in the Washington Post, and I laid out a bunch of facts that I thought painted a fairly bleak picture, where boys are more than twice as likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than girls, more than 5 times as likely to find themselves in juvenile detention, are much less likely to graduate from high school. If they do go to college, they will find themselves comprising only 40.5% of college students, which is a real minority at this point. If you don't go to college, then you're struggling to find a job in this economy. Income for men has declined in real terms since 1990. Almost 15% of male community college students dropped out in 2020 alone, which was a mind-boggling stat. About 1/3 of all men are either out of the job market or unemployed or have dropped out in some form or fashion. That number is mind-blowing. You can go down the list and see that there are a lot of very, very tough statistics, including the fact that Now, deaths of despair among middle-aged men are reaching record and unprecedented levels. So if you trace it from boyhood to manhood to adulthood to growing up, it all looks rough. And to your point, that there's a circularity because unfortunately, if you have men who are failing, then you have a lot of kids growing up without dads. And it turns out that having a dad is a very, very positive thing for positive outcomes. I have to say, Warren, it made me feel good about myself just in that I'm a dad and, you know, I'm around. I mean, I actually don't consider myself like a dad of the year candidate or anything like that. And I, you know, I feel self-conscious about that, but the data shows that, well, you know, just my being here is like a huge net positive. So those are some of the things that I use to outline the magnitude and depth of the boy crisis. If you're trapped in an elevator with someone and they say, "Hey, boy crisis," like, what do you mean? What do you say to them?
I say boys all around the world in all 56 of the largest developed nations are falling behind girls in every single academic subject, and especially in reading and writing. And not doing well in reading and writing is the single biggest academic predictor of success. And our daughters, you know, they want to have somebody worthy of them to marry. You know, as you said in a previous podcast, women are not interested in marrying men who are unemployed, who are not doing well educationally, who are not doing well success-wise. And so then they usually say to me something like, well, go ahead, you were going to say.
Well, Warren, what's your personal family situation? Do you have kids yourself?
Two girls, which is ironic, and I'm married and been together with my wife for 28 years.
So are you a grandfather as well? Have your daughters had kids?
I'm a grandfather of a grandson. Yes, absolutely.
Oh, wow. So it all's around.
Yeah.
You know, it kind of makes sense too, because you started down this path as a champion of women, in part probably because, you know, you had two daughters and you saw some of their experiences, and then you know, you realized that that boys and men had issues as well. So this is an international phenomenon. And you define in your book a number of major issues and hurdles. And one that I think a lot of people are sensing, but you put a name to, is what you call the purpose void, where boys are concerned. Describe what you mean.
Yes, historically speaking, every generation had its war. And during that period of time, we said to boys, young boys, you know, Uncle Joe there, he joined the Marines and we're really proud of him. And the boy and Uncle Sam would say some version of Uncle Sam needs you or wants you. And the boy would learn that if he, even though he was being criticized at home and maybe he wasn't great at school, nevertheless, he could be a hero. He could really be something if he risked his life at that war. So each generation trained its boys to define masculinity as risking disposability of their life. And if they didn't risk disposability in war, then they risked disposability in a more subtle way in the workplace. What I mean by that is when men, and we often hear about the pay gap between men and women, there is actually not a pay gap between men and women per se. The pay gap is between dads and moms, because when dads and moms become dads and moms reduce the amount of intensity of their work load outside of the home and increase the amount of intensity inside the home. And men who who want to be a musician or an actor or an artist or an elementary school teacher and do something really fulfilling to them, they realize that the fulfilling occupations by and large pay less, hence starving artists. So men give up the glint in their eyes, their dream, and they go off, and instead of being an elementary school teacher, they become a superintendent of schools or something along those lines. And then we as feminists were criticizing men as having the power because they were earning more money or they were the superintendent of schools, even though there were more women in education, without realizing that that was the sacrifice that men made. It was not male privilege and male power. Men gave up their dream, the glint in their eyes, what they really wanted to do, to be able to do something that would lead to their children having opportunities that they didn't have. So for example, I met, I live out in California, and I met before Uber started as a cab driver. who was very deeply, he drove 70 plus hours a week. And I asked him, why do you drive that much? And he said, well, first of all, most of the cab drivers do. And second, I wanted to put my daughter through college because nobody in our family has ever gone to college. And I think my daughter's pretty smart. And so I'm really, I'm making this sacrifice so that she'll have an opportunity to be something that I would have loved to be, but I need to do the cab driving to make that happen. Well, she got into UC Santa Cruz. And he told me then when she came back from UC Santa Cruz after her first holiday period, she said, Dad, I didn't realize this, but you are part of the patriarchy, and you are, you are really more of an oppressor, and she had all these words for me that made me feel like everything I'd done to sacrifice for the last 25, 35 years was a waste, and I didn't feel loved, appreciated, or heard. And so many men feel that today. But until they get into a men's group and they see that lots of other men feel the same way, they just keep those feelings to themselves, and they don't articulate them to themselves. Women can't hear what men don't say. So women don't realize that they see men getting into higher positions, but they don't see the karoshi. They don't see, which is the Japanese word for death at the desk or death from overwork. The Japanese, in fact, have a game that they play called karoshi. And the person who they compete to get to the top of the corporate ladder or the political ladder or the religious ladder. And the person who gets to the top of the ladder first commits suicide, because the young Japanese millennials realize that men climbing to the top of the ladder is not power. It's becoming a human doing rather than becoming a human being. And becoming a human being, doing what you want to do, doing what fulfills you, doing what the women's movement has taught women to do, that's power. That's real power. And so this is the new understanding of real power. But when that isn't understood and there aren't lots of fathers involved, this purpose void that was the men's willingness to define themselves as men by being the sole breadwinner or being willing to die in war, we no longer need so many men to die in war, and many more women are helping with the breadwinning. So the boys have this, they don't have their old senses of purpose. And when they don't have a father, oftentimes the single mother will help the boy define a sense of purpose, like you're going to be a great singer, you could be a great basketball player. But usually the father contributes the boundary enforcement that creates the discipline for the boy to fulfill his dream. So the mom tends to be very good at helping the boy define his dream, but oftentimes will do things for the boy, not creating the discipline that it takes to become that great Olympic champion, which means giving up pretty much everything to be in those Olympics and to fulfill your dream.
So what do you recommend as trying to fill the purpose void? Let's say that historically boys have been soldiers and breadwinners is what you're suggesting. And then there's less of a need for the former and unfortunately tougher paths to the latter. So what is a possible substitute? And the first thing that came to mind for me was video games, which is not a great substitute, but it's like, they'll give you digital version of certainly being a soldier or breadwinner, because you'll like earn points and gold and status.
Yes, video games usually, to the degree that young boys without fathers play video games, is they become a form of addiction that disconnects them from real life human experience, both with people their age and usually becomes an escape from doing the schoolwork that they need to do and do the other things that discipline them. The single best, there's two major solutions, I would say. One is understanding what dads contribute to the home and to the family that moms can contribute, that every single mom listening to this can do these things, but dads tend to do these things. These things are things like roughhousing, teasing, taking them on adventures, letting them take risks that aren't likely to kill them, but risks that allow them to get lost, that allow them to make mistakes, taking them to the playground, leaving them with other kids in the playground, as opposed to sitting there constantly watching them. The child is more likely to get into a fight on the playground without the mom or dad around. But when the father can process and talk with the child about, well, what led you to understand that you might get into a fight there? One of the kids there was a bully. What led you to understand that he's a bully? Well, he was drinking. He was pushing other people around. He was fouling people and, doing those things. And so what could you have done that was different than what you did? Well, I guess I could have left. Yes, you could have left, but they may have called me a chicken. So talk to me about what it's like to be called a chicken, and why are you afraid to be called a chicken, and so on. And what takes more courage, giving in to being called a chicken, or actually being able to walk away when you're being called a chicken and not being controlled by those names. Or roughhousing, for example. Dads are far more likely than moms to roughhouse. And the moms usually, when a dad roughhouses, say something like, "Oh my God."
I'm happy to say, Warren, I read a study early on that roughhousing is good for development of boys. So as a result, I mess with my boys regularly. And
yes,
like I just pick them up and like throw them onto a bed and just like lie on top of them and do stuff like that. Because hey, it's good for their it's good for their upbringing.
it's good for their upbringing, it's good for their brain development, and it's also good for something that's extremely counterintuitive, which is empathy. Because the chances are, if you have two sons, and if you're roughhousing with both of them at the same time, maybe Chris will be do something that is not what you want him to do, and you make it clear probably that if you continue to do that, there's not going to be any more roughhousing. Now your children have to decide, are they going to push the other one aside and then lose their roughhousing? And when you make it so that when they push somebody else aside, or are not empathetic to the needs of their brother, that's going to be the end of the roughhousing. And when they know they're going to lose the roughhousing, that's the boundary enforcement that teaches them to focus on postponed gratification, not the immediate gratification of just pushing their brother out of the way, but the postponed gratification of getting the roughhousing by not pushing their brother out of the way, which teaches them that somebody else here is important besides them. And it also teaches them the difference between assertiveness and aggressiveness. So in that process, you're teaching them postponed gratification, empathy, social skills that lead them to doing much better at school.
So you were describing what can be used to fill the void of purpose.
Yes. So filling the purpose void is a little bit is so teaching the boy postponed gratification then allows him to be able to achieve whatever new sense of purpose he wants. Now, with a father and mother involved, one of the things that we have is a chance for the future is to be able to do something very different than we did with boys historically. Historically, we said, disposable at war, disposable at work. Now we can say, who are you? What makes you shine? What makes you fulfilled? What makes you feel wonderful about yourself? And if it's something like, being a musician, an artist, an actor, which takes only a small percentage succeed, helping our sons understand that you not only need the dream, so the dream is a potential new sense of purpose, but the dream becomes a great disappointment if you don't have the discipline to fulfill your dream. When boys and girls go out and they are told they're great at something, but they don't have the discipline to fulfill it, after a while, the failure that is associated with each new dream becomes so great that they're afraid to dream. And that's deeply sad. And then they often turn to drugs or to drinking, or in boys' cases in particular, to suicide. So at the age of 9, boys and girls commit suicide equally. At the age of between the ages of 10 and 14, boys' suicide rate is twice that of girls.
Wow.
Between that of 15 and 19, it's 4 times that of girls. And between the ages of 20 and 24, it is 5 times that of girls. And so the people who are most likely to commit suicide, both boys and girls, are boys and girls without dads. And because oftentimes that loss of being able to fulfill this new sense of purpose and the disappointment in oneself and the lack of discipline leads to the boys and the girls feeling disappointed in themselves, and they don't have as many friends in school, they don't get as much praise from teachers or even from their parents, and they become depressed, suicidal, drinking, drugs, and as we know, I know you know, boys are more than twice as likely to die from opioid overdoses as girls are.
No, my personal journey on this, Warren, it's interesting. I was reflecting just now where like I felt this massive pressure to do something significant and make a certain amount of money so I could start a family at some point. And I discovered entrepreneurship, which by the way was very difficult and I flopped a couple of times. But it really is a very good fit for this quest for purpose because you're building something, you're working with others, you're solving a problem. There were many, many times when I would go out there and do something like, let's say, just something sprang in my mind where like I got a message from a university in Texas saying, hey, we're looking for like a supplier of a certain type of class. And then I said, oh, I could be there tomorrow. Now, was I planning on being there? Of course not. But I just like got on a plane and went out and then had a meeting and like tried to get a contract. And there was like a sense of soldiering or adventuring in its own way, where it was like you're out there trying to conquer new ground by getting new customers, or in our case, we would expand to a new market. So it was an excellent fit for me. I started an organization that's trying to cultivate entrepreneurs because I instinctively felt like it would be a great fit for a lot of people. And I dare say that that's the kind of thing that would fill a void for a lot of boys, girls, anyone, anyone who wants to try and find some kind of purpose and significance. Now, that said, it's extraordinarily difficult to actually start a business or enterprise organization of any kind. And so the best recommendation I had to a lot of folks was to join an organization or company that was trying to do something interesting or significant, because you'll learn. I mean, what happened to me is I started a company and it failed, and then I joined 2 startups as the lieutenant, and then eventually became the CEO of another. So by working with more experienced builders and mentors, like I got better and stronger myself. So that's what I recommended to a lot of people. But everything I'm describing is not directly accessible for the average person who's just, like coming out of high school or community college or college and being like, oh, where do I find this opportunity? And then even if you did show up, that, like that the company may or may not have a need for someone with, like that particular profile. But that was my vision, my hope. In part, I think because I sensed this purpose void in myself that I managed to fill. But I sense that it would be an enormous boon if we could help fill it for others.
Absolutely. One of the great things the women's movement has done is to sort of understand that a decent percentage of women want to have this sort of sense of purpose too. My wife works at 60, 70 hours a week, even though she's in her late 60s, and I'm trying to get her to slow down a little bit and not stress out so much, but she gets this enormous sense of purpose from working that hard and from fulfilling her clients' needs and so on. And at the same time, we have to realize that there's that both boys and girls have an enormous need to achieve, but males have a second layer on that. We often say that men have a great need to do something that is significant, that proves themselves. But what very few people get is that a lot of motivation on our part as men is what we really want is love. And we know that, we know that when Lois Lane had no interest in Clark Kent, but she fell in love with Superman. That when a man when the officer and a gentleman, the woman fell in love with the officer and a gentleman, not a private and a pacifist. And we know that when we succeed, there's much greater likelihood that a woman will be interested in us. And so women often see in the world, and feminists often see, oh, men are so powerful. They're more likely to be the corporate leaders or the political candidates that win. And so therefore they have the power, when in fact, many of those men are striving to be loved, and to do something significant, and the purpose and the love go together for many men.
Well, yeah, I'm going to diverge for just a moment. My argument along these lines was, look, there are certain jobs that have very, very high market rewards associated with them. Let's call it being a CEO or something along those lines. And so then women look up and say, hey, we should be more CEOs. And then I look at that and say, that's almost certainly correct, because, like you would be great and the rest of it. But there's a significant part of me that's like, maybe we should be trying to change the entire economic system itself, so that it's not just that certain types of behaviors get outsized economic rewards. And the primary challenge shouldn't be, hey, we should make the winner circle more representative. It's like, hey, maybe we should broaden what it means to be a winner. Maybe you can be a winner by, being like a good person, taking care of folks, like in your own home or in your neighborhood or community. Maybe we need to redefine economic success in various ways, or even success as a human, which is something that you refer to, I believe, as heroic intelligence versus health intelligence. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. And basically I'm saying, like with the Kuroshi example that I gave before, that, that climbing to the top of a ladder, and unbecoming who you really want to be, not being that elementary school teacher, that musician, that artist, that writer, not even.
What did you want to be when you were a kid, Warren?
I started to stand out in writing when I was in high school, but my father made it clear when I wanted to take off, instead of shoveling snow, I wanted to go to the library to write a book in high school. He said, first of all, Warren, you need to shovel the snow. Second, I just want to warn you that only about 1 out of 100 people who write a book even get that book published. And if you can't get a publisher, you'll never get a wife, and you'll never have a family. So he was making it clear to me. He was born in 1910. When he was 35, he'd been through 2 world wars and a depression. And from his perspective, life was about making sure you were responsible, that you fulfilled obligations, and it was not about doing what you want to do. And so,
I wanted to be a spy like James Bond.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yes, and there's the ultimate hero, and it's a good example of heroic intelligence versus health intelligence. The average person doing what James Bond does for more than 6 or 7 minutes is likely to be called dead, instead of going to his funeral. And now, of course, the new James Bond movie, No Time to Die, where the women are now becoming encouraged to be the new James Bonds as well. And so you're back to your point. Yes, we need to redefine what it is to be a success. And that's one of the things that we have this opportunity to do if we do 3 things. One is we're beyond the purpose. We have this purpose void. So that means we can help our children define their sense of purpose and get the discipline to do that. They need father involvement, because the balance between being a mother and a father creates a checks and balance parenting that leads to so many boys and girls doing so much better when they have both the discipline and the nurturance, and the discipline and the nurturance back and forth.
Oh, yeah. One of the things I said when I was running for president is that we should try and keep families together, because 2-parent families just have much better outcomes among kids.
Yes.
I think I got a little bit of heat for that, even though that's just like a factual relationship.
It is, and there's a couple of things. Let me spend a minute here to just help women on this issue, and if you're a single mom, what can you do, type of thing. So first of all,
yes, please.
Yes, it is. So the most important single thing for getting, for keeping families together is communication. And the single biggest Achilles heel of all human beings is our inability to handle personal criticism without becoming defensive. The last 30 years, I've been focusing on doing couples communication workshops so that I could teach people how to handle the criticisms their partner has by altering their biologically natural state of becoming defensive and creating a safe environment for their partner to say whatever was on their mind. And that keeps marriages together, not by legislation, but by communication. If you don't have marriages stay together, usually the divorces lead to, sometimes they lead to a decent outcome, which I can explain in a minute if the 4 parameters are met. But in many cases, the father becomes less involved. The mother wants the father less involved. The mother falls in love sometimes with a new man. They maybe move to a new place out of state. The mother often, if she fights it, she has the right to children. Oftentimes men have to fight for children, and the children end up without their father in their life. What can be done as a solution to that is, I had written you about, creating the possibility of a father warrior program, where we say to men, one of your new senses of purpose is not to kill and be killed as in the past, but to love and be loved. And who needs you to love and be loved? First of all, mothers do. Every single mother I dated between my marriages used the word overwhelmed. Single moms are overwhelmed. They're torn between their jobs and not doing that well enough, and their children. And we have men out there, fathers, who have no sense of purpose, who are not being taught to love and be loved. And we really need to make it part of our national calling to say to men, we need you as we have in the past, but we need you to be fully involved with the children. Here are the 70+ reasons, things that happen that are better for children when you are involved.
At this point, being man who wants to contribute to the growth of the next generation is extraordinarily high value.
Yeah.
I know there's a waiting list for months and months for someone to be a big brother or mentor to young boys who may have single moms. We should be putting more men in position to contribute like that, and frame that as like the new struggle, because right now that's not happening, and it's having disastrous effects that you and I have both documented and tried to share with the world. So I want to hear everything about what's happened to you since you wrote this book. It came out in 2018, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so I'm guessing when you come out with this book, there are a lot of people that immediately had a negative reaction or recoiled or were like, oh, that they try and paint you as something of like a conservative men's right activist type, even though your background suggests that you're very much not those things. And then you have been working since 2018 for the last number of years. You've championed council or committee on boys and men at the White House level, which apparently the Obama administration was not interested in. You're still championing that proposal today, right?
Yes, I am.
So what has your journey been like as one of the most prominent people to make this case? I suppose I've joined your chorus where I wrote this Washington Post op-ed that's gotten a lot of attention. And it's been interesting, the reaction that I have seen. Virtually all the reaction I've gotten that's been, emailed to me or texted to me was like, wow, these facts are mind-blowing, and so glad you made this case. There's been a little bit of like hey, we shouldn't be continuing to privilege men and boys sort of thing. What has your experience and journey been like?
May I in a second get to that in just a minute. I just wanted to make sure that I communicate with the women who are listening here.
Oh, please, yeah, complete your thought.
So the most important single thing you can do if you're a single mom listening to this is to understand the differences between dad style parenting and mom style parenting, which sometimes will be reversed. But dad style parenting is not well explained. You can't hear what dad doesn't say. Dad's not likely to say anything about it because most men don't read parenting books. And if they do read parenting books, it's not in parenting books. So understanding, for example, the connection between roughhousing and empathy, roughhousing and postponed gratification, understanding the value of teasing, and also how important it is that you're there so the teasing doesn't go too far, understanding the value of risk-taking. So all those things, when you let a man know, the biological father know, that you see that he's needed for these natural propensities that he tends to display, men come when they are needed, when they're wanted, and they disappear when they're not. And the message of the last years is that men aren't that important. And so that's number one. If that's impossible because the man's in prison, he's not alive, he's really a deadbeat, then there are a lot of other options. Make sure your son gets involved in all what I call the liberal arts of sports. Team sports, pick up team sports, which is perfect preparation for preparing to be an entrepreneur. You set your own boundaries. You pick people from the beginning. You discover who works and who doesn't work. And then also sports where you are the primary person to stand out, like in tennis or in gymnastics or downhill skiing. You're part of a team maybe, but the emphasis is on you. In those liberal arts of sports, all of them is important, but also attend them often enough to find out which coach is likely to be the type of coach that you'd like to have be a good role model for your son. Let the coach know that your son does not have a good male role model involved. Most coaches will bend over backwards to be more involved. That's one, sports. Number two, Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts. Cub Scouts, a lot of proven data showing that what all of us and every mom that I've ever spoken to cares about, which is the character development of her son. Character development is enhanced enormously by consistent involvement in the Cub Scouts for 2 or more years. Boy Scouts is a wonderful breakdown. Boy Scouts has consciously or unconsciously deconstructed masculinity in such a way as to reward boys with merit badges and many, many rituals that lead to boys having that sense of purpose and doing well. So take a look at the part of the boy crisis that talks about all the things that moms can do to get a father and mother involved, and the importance of checks and balance parenting. Value, mom, what you contribute, but also value what dad contributes, and know that your differences are not a sign that you need to be divorced, but your differences are exactly what your children need if negotiated in a way that allows both of you to hear each other without becoming defensive. So I just wanted to make sure that the moms were...
Such an important, vital message, Warren. And one thing I really appreciate about your book is that you try and be practical and give guideposts and have real application in people's lives. It's clear to me you want to help people. I mean, that's what's driven you to this point.
I think the most important single thing is understanding how to construct a family dinner night without it becoming a family dinner nightmare. In family dinner nights, maybe once or twice a week, teaching your children, teaching yourself how to completely listen to your children, but then also teaching your children how to completely listen to you. And to be able to discuss controversial topics that are more exciting than video games and electronics at the table. There's a potential magic to a family dinner night constructed well, and a potential disaster when it's not done well. And so I've really focused, I hope, in the boy crisis on that issue. I'm happy to get to the other thing that you asked about the journey.
Oh, no, I'm just very curious about what the heck is the state of the discourse around this. What are the measures that one can take? And you would know, because, well, first, let me ask you, to the extent that there is popular movement around trying to help boys and men in this way, you're the first person I thought of, and you wrote the book. Are there others? I feel like now I'm one, which I appreciate. What does the landscape look like? And what have the last 4 years been like for you? What are you most interested in and excited about right now? Yeah, I'm curious as to what the state of this particular conversation is.
Yes. First of all, I would say read Forward, read Leonard Sax's Boys Adrift, read everything that Michael Gurian has written on boys. These are some other people as well that have really contributed in this area. I hope the boy crisis, I spent 14 years researching and writing, and I'm very solution oriented in the boy crisis. I made a commitment to myself to say nothing that I couldn't solve. And and I know you're very solution oriented as well. And very data based as well. And so that's one thing, the journey. I started by, first of all, I'm more politically liberal than I am conservative, although I often say to my friends that I'm going to write a book called Between a Rock and a Hard Place, because I often feel caught between a rock
Yeah,
and
a
a
lot of
hard
people
place.
feel the same way.
I think that, yeah, one of the things I really respected when I went around and did the interviewing of the presidential candidates, 2 or 3 of the campaign managers said, Warren, my candidate really likes you and just is really turned on, but we can't afford to alienate our feminist base. And when there's a divorce, our feminists want to be able to have the right to be the one to decide what's going to happen with the children. And the single mothers, if you tell them that boys are doing badly, they're going to feel criticized. We can't risk that. And I felt so deeply sad. And when you formed the Forward Party, to me, in the back of my mind, I said, he is feeling the pressure of all the the people above that are sort of saying you can't say this if you're a Republican, you can't say this if you're a Democrat, and you're now free to be able to say what you really feel. And when you came out with the Washington Post op-ed and the tweets that sort of suggested that there's a real problem with men and boys, I felt maybe that was an example of that. But at any rate, one of the things that happened for me was that that as I started speaking on this issue, a number of people from the White House did spot me, and they asked me to come to the White House to brief them on the Boy Crisis book. And I did, and they brought in people from HHS and from DOJ, Department of Justice, and the presidential staff. And they listened really attentively to what I had written in the Boy Crisis and briefed them on. And then they asked me to write a speech that President Trump might give. And I did do that. And as it turned out,
This is in the Trump administration.
This is the Trump administration, right? And so what very much didn't completely surprise me, because I had seen this already, is that the conservatives were expressing a much greater consciousness of the importance of mothers and fathers, the importance of family, and they were and they had a sense of that boys were having a lot of challenges. And so even though I was not a fan of Trump per se, I saw a much greater receptivity on the part of conservatives toward this issue. Then I was interviewed by a libertarian candidate who asked me to be his vice presidential candidate. So I saw a lot of interest in the part of libertarians. John Mackey was a very good friend, and so I saw an interest there. I saw much less interest on the part of Democrats, unfortunately. I had some hope when Biden was running for office that he was forming this gender policy council. And I said, oh, great, gender. It's not just women and girls. But unfortunately, the Gender Policy Council was focused only on girls and women, and not on boys, not on men, not on fathers. So even Black boys were not included, Black fathers were not included. And the group of people.
And is it right that there was not a single man on that Gender Policy Council? Is that accurate?
I think there are some male feminists on the Gender Policy Council, but what is not on the Gender Policy Council, and I've spoken to Jen Klein about this, who is the main chair of the co-chair of the Gender Policy Council, and her response is, oh, President Biden is a father. He cares about being a father. He cares about men. Don't worry, Warren. But I do worry, because you don't say, I just care about something and create no policies that help the boys and men. So for example, men, as we both know, die 5 years sooner than women on average, but and they die sooner of 19 out of the top 20 causes of death, but there is no federal office on men's health. except for Native American health, men's health. There is 7 federal offices on women's health. You can, that's really, it's unconstitutional. It's a violation of equal protection of the laws. And we still have a male-only draft registration, no female-only draft registration, no female as well as male-only draft registration, or registering for some cause or something that you can do to contribute to the development of the country. And so there's so many things that have been left out. There's no, the people that I've spoken to who do research on suicide, I've asked them, why is there no more interest?
You and I are definitely raising the red flag, being like, hey guys, boys need help, men need help, people are struggling, outcomes are terrible. And one of the points of my WAPO op-ed was like, hey, if men fail, it's going to be bad for men, but it's kind of bad for everyone, because, and the most conspicuous examples of male failure, unfortunately, are going to be violent, that they're going to be destructive. One of the points that I made that you probably heard is that if you have a lot of men who are in their basements being subject to toxic ideologies, some are going to be radicalized, some are going to show up with firearms in a country that has hundreds of millions of firearms, and do terrible things. So like all these problems are tied together. I think that the first couple steps are recognizing that boys and men are struggling, then this is not mutually exclusive. It's like, look, if you want organizations that help women, I'm all for it. I think that maybe men should also have the benefit of the same kind of empathy and assistance. And by the way, a lot of the problems that our country should be most concerned about are related to male failure.
Absolutely. I got about 8 weeks ago, I got an email from somebody who said, I read your boy crisis book. It was really helpful to me. As a result of that, I did not kill myself, and I did not do the mass shooting I was planning to do. I wrote a 52-page manifesto about why I was doing the mass shooting I was planning, but I was brought up by a mom, and I was brought up by 2 aunts and a grandmother, and none of them had any men in their lives, and I had no man in my life. So I started drifting into video games. And my entire life was about video games. And my mom never told me to get away from video games. Now, ultimately, I was able to work with this man and have him, he thought his mom was, he hated his mom. And by extension, he hated all women. And so he then ended up getting involved with 4chan and 8chan, which are basically neo-fascist type of groups. In 8chan, 2 of those people in 8chan have already committed major mass shootings. And I said, well, what attracted you to 4chan and 8chan? And he said, now in retrospect, after I read The Boy Crisis, what I'm seeing is that I had no structure, I had no father figure, I had no sense of purpose. And so the only thing I was trained to do was to sort of interact and win at the video games. And I'm so angry at my mother for letting me do that. And I had him role play his mom and say, what was, and actually say, what did, and when he spoke as his mom, he realized that his mom thought that this is what he loved to do, and she wanted him to support him doing what he loved to do. And that his mom's response came out of love, not hate, and not something to be hated. And so he did temper down on that, and has gotten, I think, much more positive. But
look at this, you saved lives, Warren. I mean, it's tragic that it has come to that, where your book about the crisis among boys might have spoken to someone and kept them from doing something terrible and violent and criminal. At the same time, it must make you feel like, wow, your work is really important.
It really does help. And I think one of the things that really is helpful here is that you were talking about in one of your previous podcasts, incels and some of these angry men. But one of the things that I've found about angry men or angry women in the couples communication workshop, almost in, one of the things I say is that anger is vulnerability's mask. Almost every time you see somebody that is angry, you can ask a different question. How are they hurt? What is their vulnerability? And if you ask that question, you begin to listen to their pain. And when you listen to their pain and let them know, don't argue with them about their pain, but just let them know what you hear that they said. And you keep working at it until they say, yes, that's exactly what I meant to say. You do that to almost anyone, for that almost anybody, and you will see an enormous reduction in their anger. And that's the way to deal with angry people, not by making them into horrible human beings that you hate, because hate met by hate only increases hate.
That's an incredibly profound lesson, and exactly the kind of thing I want to make the customary reaction via forward. So you are fighting for a White House Commission on Men and Boys, is that right? Like, what is your current cause and work, and how can someone keep up with you and support you?
I think the most valuable thing is to let me know if what after you've had a chance to read The Boy Crisis, let me know what is of value to you about it, and then I will work with you to either ask you to help be involved with the coalition to create a White House Council on Boys and Men, or encourage you to be involved with helping boys and girl non-hateful, positive, female positive boys to work with them. There are so many things that are happening, potentially happening in school, potentially happening in mental health. Suicide has almost no studies on it of suicide for males. There's an inventory in the book of 63 things red flags of depression and suicide. You can help bring that into schools. There are so many that you can teach couples and families how to do the family dinner nights together and constructively. You can teach young men how to communicate so that they become prepared to be great fathers that can communicate with both women and their children and teach their children great role models of communication. There's so many opportunities out there, and really follow what you are doing, because you are the only national political person that understands these issues, and you've articulated so much of it in Forward, and really get involved with your campaign and make it happen.
Oh, wow. Well, that's so kind. Right back at you, Warren. Thank you for making me feel not crazy. Dr. Warren Farrell, the author of The Boy Crisis, Why Our Boys Are Struggling and What We Can Do About It. He's a very, very solutions-oriented human, and the book is as well. Thank you so much, Warren. Appreciate your work. And, maybe we'll see each other again out there in the real world.
I would love that. I'd love to do a series of follow-ups with you if you would like to do that. It would be really a pleasure.
This is maybe the most important issue in American life today, and it's not going anywhere. So you and I'm sure we'll have plenty of chances to make common cause.
I look forward to that very much.